Hello, this is praios. I'm a professional gambler. Today we will learn how to play against Maniacs. Luckily, this was already prepared for me so that I have less work covering this topic. The original video is from Galfond and we will jump into it. Thanks, Galfond.
Hey everybody, Phil here. Everybody wants to know how to adjust to a Maniac, and the answer is it depends. There are different types of Maniacs, and yes, at the very beginning of playing with somebody, you might be able to tell from observing a few hands that they're just putting a lot of money into pots, but you don't have more specifics at that point, and we'll talk about that. But what I want to do today is give three kind of more concrete, specific examples of a type of Maniac, and I've come up with ones that I think are like that I've seen before that are kind of reasonable.
Yeah, this is correct. Not every Maniac is alike. I mean, some Maniacs are still thinking, but over bluffing and being too aggressive, while others are just brain dead, bloating every pot. So you still have to look into their individual tendencies.
Characters, and then I'll talk about how I would adjust. So first, I'll start with somebody who he likes to put in a lot of money on each street. He does this by over bluffing. He also does this by just kind of ramming in too much money with pretty good hands. Doesn't overfold, certainly underfolds, but is not he's not clueless. He's not check calling flop with no pair, no draw, no hope. But when he's got a little bit of equity, or he senses weakness, or whatever the case may be, he pounces. He's doing so with huge bets, huge raises. The first and most important thing to keep in mind against it.
You cannot see what's written here, right? Oh, with this trick, you almost can see it, but only almost. Oh, what do I need to get rid of? We also don't need subtitles. So Maniac 1 puts in lots of money on each street over bluffs, rams in too much money with pretty good hands, and also underfolds. I think it's not that, I mean, Maniacs often can fold in my experience, but yeah, so often the best strategy is to play very passive against them, let them hang themselves. And actually, some Maniacs, once you show counter aggression, can fold. So yeah, but let's, because if they are not completely retarded, they also understand that they are very aggressive always, and if someone shows counter aggression, they know that his opponent probably has a good hand.
This kind of player is when they check to you, if you bet, you are opening the door for them to put in a huge check raise. So what's the most obvious adjustment that we make? Well, we bet with a range that is more polarized, because a polarized range likes being raised. If we start going thinly for value, that's a range that does not like being raised. So on the flop, we're going to bet our sets. We're going to bet our top two pair. Depending on we're going to bet our straights. We're going to bet our flushes, etc. We're going to bet our very strong hands, and then we're going to bet some bluffs. Now, this opponent is probably not going to overfold, like I said. So we don't want to bluff too much, but you bluff occasionally, obviously. This opponent is not clueless if they see you just.
Yeah, I mean, bluffing with like no pair, no draw or something makes sense. I mean, you will lose the hand always unless you try to take it down. And if he can fold at least some amount of the time, it might be okay to bet now. And also, if he's not completely clueless and is looking at what's happening around him, he will probably also recognize that you only play against him with very good hands. So that's why you also need to have some bluffs that he knows that you are not always having it.
Always betting, like always having the nuts when you bet.
Yeah, keyword balance being balanced.
They're going to catch on. They're going to stop shoveling in 200 big blinds against you. So we need to bluff a little bit. Now, once we check back and we get to the turn, kind of similar logic. Basically, we don't want to.
Yeah, you need to pot control a lot more against these type of players. Especially with your middling type hands, because you just need to keep the pot small, and this guy will not allow that to you. So yeah, don't bet if you don't know what to do against a check raise.
Open the door for the.
Or don't bet if you don't want to get raised. So we could also go check call with more hands than you normally would against people not that, yeah, not liking to raise that much.
This player to check bomb to whatever 6x pot. So once again, we're betting a pretty polarized range. And what this ends up meaning is that, first of all, we're checking back some decently strong hands that we would normally not check back twice to keep the pot small and go for value on the river. It also means that we're missing some bluffs that have reasonably high equity because we don't want to get blown off that equity, or we don't want to be forced to put in a ton of money with like the wrong amount of equity. But that's okay. I think oftentimes people don't like this approach, or they feel like they're playing too weak by, I'm not making enough money with my top pair weak kicker. I'm not making enough money with second pair. I'm not making enough money with a weak over pair. That's not how you beat this player. I mean, it can be, and obviously, if we want to get more specific into how they play, maybe it is. Maybe you start delay c betting turn with some of these hands that, you get put in a tough spot when they check raise, but they're only check raising 10% of the time. It's not 30% of the time, whatever the case may be. It depends how kind of crazy they are. But this player is going to lose money to you. The types of mistakes they're making.
Check raising 10% of the time sounds like normal player, not like a maniac. I would expect a maniac to be at least like raising like 30% or something.
They're going to lose money to you when you have a good hand, and they're putting in way too much money, both with bluffs and with value hands. So you don't have to do anything. The way that you exploit them is actually just relaxing. You don't have to like outmaneuver them. Like, yeah, they check raise flop, and maybe
You have to be patient, wait for good hands, and then get paid.
they've got too many thin value hands and too many bluffs, and now you want to attack that range. And sure, you can do some of that, but the way to really beat them is not get into that spot in the first place. So yeah, against this player, polarized flop c betting range, polarized turn betting range.
Oh, you can read again. Tendency and adjustment is what you cannot read fully. Oh, tendency, huge bets and raises, overbluffs, underfolds a little. The overbluffs is, yeah, okay. Adjustment, play a more polarized strategy. You already had that, just like a summary.
We're just only betting with hands that don't mind getting raised for the most part, and take it from there. Obviously, you'll get to the river with some hands like you'll get a lot of check bets. You'll have some strong value hands that can check bet, and yeah, if they check raise the river, you deal with it. But you haven't let them use maximum leverage against that portion of your range. When they're using maximum leverage by check bombing flop or turn, you've got a strong hand, and that's where you're going to make your money. So let's talk about Maniac number 2. Maniac number 2 forces in way too much money with good hands.
Okay, we have different types of maniacs. And before we get into maniac number 2, consider to check out my other channel too. It's called Finance with Axel. I talk about investing, cryptocurrency, and money. So yeah, don't miss that if you are interested in this topic too. And if you are a poker player, you usually care about money and and gambling too. And cryptocurrency is a lot similar to gambling. And some people some treat it as gambling only and not as investment. Okay, let's get back.
With weak top pair and sometimes open ender plus flush draw, sure, but they're not bluffing that much. They just they call your 3-bet with 9s and you're 200 big blinds deep, and the flop is 8-7-3 two-tone, and you c-bet half pot, and they 5x raise with 9s to get in 200 big blinds. That's this kind of player. They're just putting in a ton of money with pretty good hands. And
this is, I think, his definition of maniac is different from mine. I mean, this is like, I don't know. I don't would characterize him as a maniac. So he's just not so this guy sounds like someone who has like he's not able to categorize hands correctly. He has like one standard when he wants to put in all the money he has. So like top pair or over pair when he wants to be all in. So yeah, but that's not a maniac. It's just someone who does not understand ranges and thinks that he has top when he has top pair that he is having the nuts. I mean, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call this guy maniac.
Better. The easiest and most obvious adjustment to this player is once they put in a lot of money, fold unless you have a hand that beats a good portion of their value range. This player is going to once again lose money to you. Like when you have a very good hand and they have a pretty good hand, they're going to just give you all the money. They're going to make it easy on you. When you have a marginal hand and they have a pretty good hand, they're also going to make it easy on you because they're going to force in all the money. And now it's your job to just fold middle pair. It's your job to fold these hands that are just pure bluff catchers against a range that's not bluffing enough. Not only not bluffing enough, but then having way too many value bets, which means proportionally they're almost never bluffing.
I think actually many people play like this. They don't think in relative hand strength. For example, if a very weak passive player raises you, top pair is not good enough anymore. So they don't understand that. I mean, I think even I might have been playing like this in the beginning of my poker career. I had like one threshold in mind where I thought, okay, this is good enough to get it in. And then I had like top pair, top kicker. I was like, okay, let's get all the money in. And yeah, back in the day, this approach worked. Nowadays, not. I mean, it could still work. I think it's probably not working anymore, but yeah, you get the general idea of this player who is not a maniac in my eyes.
They make it pretty easy. And actually, against this type of opponent, you can do some bet folding with value hands. Now, it's kind of tricky because you don't want to get into a spot where...
I mean, he is under bluffing, which we learned, so it would make sense to bet fold. Hence where you want protection, but which are not strong enough to get all the way.
They check jam turn for 5x pot, and you have a hand that beats like,
It seems also that we are talking about no limit hold'em only because it's hard in pot limit Omaha to jam for 5x pot unless he's some sort of cheater.
5% or 10% of their value range, because you still have to fold that because 90% of the time you're losing. But it is unfortunate that you kind of like get bluffed off the best hand by a value hand. So be a little careful with those hands. But actually, you can kind of do some more like thin value / protection betting on the turn with like second pair that just has a very clear fold to the raise because they're not bluffing enough. And now another thing to keep in mind is when this player check calls on the flop and or turn, remember that they are kind of ramming money in with thin value. So when they call, they don't have that thin value that they're supposed to have in their calling range. So now their range is weakened.
Yeah, so they give away their hand strength in case that they aren't. I mean, in case they are just calling, we know that they are having a weak part of their range. That's certainly correct.
And you can bluff a decent amount. Actually, probably this type of opponent's going to overfold turns and overfold rivers because they're putting in so much money early with good hands. So yeah, this opponent, you don't have to take the same approach as Maniac number 1. It's actually a much different approach, even though both of them at the very beginning might present like...
Do we have a Maniac number 3 as well? I think so, probably. Let's see.
Players that are playing kind of the same way. So let's talk about Maniac number 3. Maniac number 3 loves to bluff. If you give this player rope, they're just going for it. Anytime they kind of get to the river with a hopeless hand in a big pot, if you give them a chance to bluff, they will. They love to, raise flop with weak semi-bluffs, strong semi-bluffs. They like to raise turn with weak semi-bluffs, strong semi-bluffs. They like to bluff the river when checked too. They like to bluff the river against...
Semi-bluffs is a word you can't see. And I think these type of guys also do it sometimes with like no pair, no draw type hands. Yeah, they have to bluff when they sense weakness.
Small bets too, as well. This type of player usually doesn't like bluff raise river against big bets. They kind of like to attack.
They attack small bets, what can't see fully, but yeah, that's exactly what I have in mind when I think about a Maniac. And yeah, against these dudes, you adjust by playing passively, letting them hang themselves. And what you also want to do, what was I going to say? Bet if you have Alzheimer. Not sure if it's if the disease is even called so in English. I hope so. Like the brain disease. Yeah, you play very passive, let them hang themselves. Yeah, try to pot control. So if you have a marginal hand and it's checked to you and you are in position, obviously check back a lot of things where you don't can handle the heat.
Weakness, or they'll find themselves on the river with.
Yeah, if you have a good hand, you should do what triggers their behavior, so their maniac character traits. So if they react allergically against small bets and always want to raise, then you probably have to put in a small bet. Or if they always want to attack when they sense weakness, you have to check. Stuff like that. Some maniacs even are not completely bad, and you can actually bluff them because they also realize when they get raised that his opponent most likely has a good hand, because he's very aggressive all the time, and if someone wants to put even more money in, they know, okay, this guy has to have something, otherwise he wouldn't raise me, because it would be suicidal otherwise. So often you can't just raise and hope that he's coming back over the top, because then he might stop bluffing. So you have to be very passive until the river, where you let him 3-barrel, and then you can put in your raise.
With air because they bet twice, or like they see bet flop, you check call, turn goes check check, and now something hits on the river and they can't help themselves, or they check called flop and turn goes check check, and now they can't help, whatever the case may be. Oftentimes, like they'll bluff raise flop, so flop is 10-8-3, they're in position, you bet, they raise with like every gut shot, then you call, and then the turn is a king and it goes check check. Well, now they've started a bluff, but they've kind of given up on the turn because they don't like the turn. But now that they are checked to again on the river and they can't win by checking, they like to bet. So that's kind of the most obvious adjustment, is make sure that in a spot where it's very likely that they have air, give them rope, let them bluff you. Kind of similar to Maniac number 1, and a little bit the case with Maniac number 2. We never want to slow play. We want to bet kind of polarized. We want to bet all of our strong hands, and we want to be a little bit careful with hands that have to that are in an
At a slightly polarized range. Never slow play? What did she mean by never slow play? Many maniacs are also just betting, but not necessarily raising that much. I mean, when I'm out of position, I probably would lean forwards if I have a very good hand and it's the maniac, like the biggest maniac, maniac only, not he just is overly aggressive always. Then I would have checked to him and not bet, because if I bet, he might fold some stuff, but if check to, he will always be aggressive. So I don't necessarily agree with the never slow play. Bet a slightly polarized range, definitely true. Loves to let all streets. That's the maniac.
comfortable spot against a check raise, basically. So like decent semi-bluff hands that really don't want to bet fold their equity. Even on like that 10-8-3 flop, a hand like king queen, king jack with a backdoor flush draw and all those backdoor straight draws, like you don't want to get check raised off of that by their 6-7 and all that stuff. So check more of those hands that have some hope and like some good turn cards. You can still bluff on the flop, of course, and this player, it starts to get. So what you're supposed to do is you actually still bet the right number of value hands, potentially even a little thinner, maybe not. And then when they check raise, you just grit your teeth and you call down or you get the money in. A lot of people don't have the stomach for that, and so you actually can probably get.
Yeah, you will have very, very strong variance against guys like this because you often have to call down with sort of marginal hands, which you could have folded against someone else, but not against this guy. And if this guy has a good session and is making hands, then you will lose a lot to him. Actually, I know one guy, if you play with him, you always are under the impression that he is a complete maniac. But he knows how to play his image very well, and he gets his opponents on tilt, and his opponents assume that they always have to call down against him. And I think in live games, this guy is actually a huge winning player, because people make insane adjustments. They just don't like to fold against him at all, and they get it in way too light, especially pre-flop. So when he has a good hand, he basically always gets paid. He also didn't talk about pre-flop at all, because yeah, some people are also just post-flop or pre-flop maniacs. So some guys put in way too much money with way too marginal hands pre-flop, but stop on post-flop, and some play normal pre-flop and then start to get a maniac post-flop. So yeah, this is also like another category. You could categorize people like this too, and yeah, he didn't do. I think this would be actually better than the 3 type of maniacs he threw in this video.
80%, 90% of the EV against this player by skipping those plays, just checking the flop when you're pretty uncomfortable to face a check raise and call down. You're going to make more money if you're right about this read by betting flop and calling down, but you're not making a ton of money. You know, they have better hands, they have draws that have reasonable equity against you. So yes, you're supposed to be betting and calling down because they're over bluffing, over semi bluffing, and barreling through often. But if you skip some of those plays, you're not going to lose that much EV as long as you're betting the quite strong hands. That's where they're just going to punt off the money to you. This type of player actually, when they check call, they more often have a made hand than a draw. I mean, it depends how loose they are. Sometimes they just call with like high card and backdoor draws because they're super loose, or other times they check raise so many of their draws, and when they check call, they have middle pair or top pair.
Yeah, that's basically not every maniac is alike, so they all have their special tendencies, and you have to get these reads and adjust properly. So you cannot treat every maniac or every passive fish or every type of player the same way, because yeah, all have their their characteristics. I mean, sometimes people are even both, like passive fish and maniac, because they start off being a passive fish, but once they lose a certain amount, they get very angry and become a maniac. So that's what I meant.
So hand read accordingly. And, against this player, let's just use the same 10-8-3 board. You see bet flop, they call, turn pairs the 8. Against some opponents, bluffing, whatever, 7-6 works out well because they have to check fold their queen jacks and their flush draws and things like that. Against this player, that they probably raised a lot of those hands on the flop. So now actually they hit the 8 pretty hard, and they have like 10s and 8s pretty often as well. So those semi bluffs on the turn aren't going to work as well against them. But yeah, most of the money comes from.
I think this type of player will not have 10-8 that often, because he would have put in more money on the flop already. I think more likely would be that he has just middle pair, which he played cautiously and now had hit trips.
Betting good hands and then letting them give you a lot of money when you've got a good hand. And then the last one, which I think I touched on, but when you get to those river spots where they're likely to have air, make sure you're not betting big. You can bet small to try to induce bluffs. or you can check to try to induce bluffs, but look for those spots to induce bluffs on the river rather than going for kind of thin value. Generally speaking, obviously, hand read every situation is different. Use your poker abilities. Don't just blindly follow this strategy against anyone who loosely fits this description on every board texture. But yeah, that's how I would approach it. Generally, when you sit down at the table and somebody's clearly putting a lot of money into the pot, but you haven't figured out which kind of maniac they are, just play tight ranges and polarize ranges. So again, assume that you're going to get raised too frequently and bet hands that are comfortable getting raised, whether they're, bluffs that can just bet fold or very strong hands that want to get raised. And as you play with this player over time, pay attention to their showdowns, see if it seems like they're the overbluffing type or if they're just ramming in too much money with pretty good hands, and then you can make the adjustments I talked about in the video.
And get reads is always a good advice. I mean, yeah, not only against maniacs.
If there's another type of maniac that you've had trouble with, let me know in the comments.
Yeah, he forgot about pre-flop and post-flop, but I don't know if he watches my videos. I hope then he can make a video about it, but because I'm not going to comment. Yeah, I hope this was helpful. Yeah. Now you should know how to play against maniacs. You got the thoughts of the Galfond and also mine. And yeah, like, subscribe, share this video if it was helpful and if you liked it. Yeah. And don't forget to check out my other channel. Thanks for watching. Bye until next time.